Good afternoon. My name's Donna Thomas, and I'm a research fellow from the University of Central Lancashire in the UK. And it's an absolute privilege and honour to be invited to present at this symposium today. Earlier this year, I attended the SSEPA conference in September 2022 to present around children's unexplained experiences and some research that I've been conducting with children probably since 2018 now. And in that presentation, I shared details around studies that I'd conducted with children and reports from children around experiences such as mediumship, out of body experiences, and peak and mystical experiences. And they're just some examples of some of the experiences that I've certainly come across with children in my own studies. And I never really referred to women researchers as part of that presentation. But it seems that some of the stuff that I was talking about resonated very much with some of the issues raised and some of the concerns raised by women researchers and scientists in the field of parapsychology. So even though I missed this correlation in a sense, Cedar Leverett, one of the editors of the Women in Parapsychology Revisited, did see this convergence and did see this resonance between women's position in the field of parapsychology and missing children in parapsychology research. And that's what I aim to talk about today in this presentation. So the invitation from Cedar forced me really to examine what may be, if any, the resonance or the convergences between women's position in the field of parapsychology and missing children in the field of parapsychology. You know, what may be the similarities between those things. So I looked at three things to explore this. The first thing was my own excursion really into parapsychology with children. I'm a social scientist by trade, and I'm in a department that isn't parapsychology. So this work and this journey with children has been extremely challenging, and that's what I thought about. And I thought about the support that I'd received as part of that journey, and the people who had advocated for children's unexplained experiences. And they all seem to be male scientists and researchers and philosophers. So Graham O'Connor, for example, David Luke, who's been extremely supportive of the work, Bernardo Castro, a male philosopher and scientist, again, who really has appreciated what children can bring to the study of experience, consciousness. And other male researchers and scientists, such as Chris Rowe and Steve Taylor, were all extremely supportive. When I started to explore the literature, I also saw that Carlos Alvarado was a male scientist who was really advocating for equality for women in parapsychology. So this led me to think that this isn't an issue or a problem really that's orchestrated by male scientists. There's something that's underlying the sciences that may be creating inequalities for women scientists and certain groups in research, vulnerable groups and marginalized groups, such as children. So the other two aspects of my own examination of this was going to the literature and of course going to the origins of women in parapsychology, which was the symposium in 1991, and thinking about what were the highlights coming out of that conference in terms of its contributors. And when you look into that material, the value, first of all, not just for women in parapsychology, but for women across many disciplines in society, institutionally, these are really valuable insights, and there are issues that permeate across many disciplines and areas of social life. And in the original Women in Parapsychology, some of the issues that were being identified was women's position in society and culturally, women's scientists' position in science, especially historically, something referred to as a masculine order of science, which is important for my talk today and something I will come back to. Notions of data being hard or soft, attention paid to context, interaction, and archetypal influences, so something that's transcending the interactive and the social. And, many of the contributors referred to something called the masculine and the feminine, and normally attributed and associated to either a male or a female. But as we'll see as we go along, it's not quite as cut and dry as personality traits or social attributes either. So these issues, how then did they resonate with some of the issues that I've been talking and writing about in terms of bringing children more into parapsychology research, and especially thinking about the value of children's experiences and how that can contribute to work that's already going on with adults in parapsychology studies? Well, like women, children are a highly excluded group. Also, they're a vulnerable group in terms of being a child, especially in position to what we refer to as adults in authority, who carry a lot of power. And adults often, we're all probably guilty of this, tend to make assumptions about children, about who they are and their experiences. And we don't often credit children with capabilities to be involved in science research or even philosophy. And there's a lot of literature now out there, especially in childhood studies, that really challenges this perspective of children and it shows children to have many capabilities to be involved in research, whether it's scientific or more social, but they are an excluded group. In terms of the masculine order of science, well, children are chaotic, spontaneous, messy. Their representation is through something we refer to as semiosis, which I will speak about again as we go along. And semiosis is something different from what we refer to as the masculine discourses, such as linguistics or mathematical discourses. Children don't represent their experiences in that way. It is much more spontaneous. It is off the page. It is embodied. And again, something we'll return to as this presentation moves along. The idea is that it's soft data as opposed to the hard data that the contributors talked about within the original Women in Parapsychology. So already there's some convergences and some resonances that are interconnecting across the idea of issues for women in parapsychology and issues for children in parapsychology. What was slightly different about children is that where we have these disagreements, when we think about women in parapsychology, there are big disagreements between a masculine order of science and a feminine way of being in the world. And how the feminine is often what I think it was White who refers to this as is always in the missionary position in science, meaning it's not valued as highly as the masculine or the hard sciences, where children can show to embody both masculine, and I don't like to say traits, but let's say energy for now, the masculine energy and the feminine energy, and transcend both those disagreements through what I refer to as the child archetype, the chaotic and the playful. So there are just some similarities that I started to really think about and explore when I was invited to come and do this presentation and write an article too. So aside from all the more obvious issues for women in science, such as the inequalities in society and culturally and so on, for me, there's a bigger issue at play, and that's an issue in our mainstream science, in our mainstream paradigms that doesn't just permeate academia, it intersects with the everyday lives of people. And this is where it becomes highly problematic too. So the issue as I saw it was how science is actually motivated, enacted and valued within the modern world, set up in a way to put on the margins different kinds of knowledge, different types of epistemologies, methodologies, and philosophies too. So the ways and the ideas of the world. Just as a quick example of what we might consider to be an othered methodology is the photograph that's on this slide, which is a photograph of a participant in one of our studies in hospital, a little girl who's had a heart transplant age 6, and she is involved in research, sharing her experiences of what happened to her and her experiences of being in ICU. And as you can see from the picture, we're using toys as method, play as method, small world play, so that this participant can play her experiences as a way of representing. It isn't the ordered, it isn't the rational, it's messy, it's playful, it's slightly chaotic, but it's research, and it's a way for a child to demonstrate their experience, especially experiences that go beyond the rational and the ordered, which is what the business of parapsychology really is about. So what do we mean by othered? And the idea of othered comes really from challenges from feminist writers in the past, challenging that masculine ordering of science and knowledge that's seen as rational, hegemonic, again, as it permeates everything that we do in science and everything we do institutionally and socially, and even in the everyday domain too. And these ideas come from really a group of French feminist philosophers who were very focused on language, because language, of course, is a conduit, is a way to legitimate science and to sustain ideas in science too. So they were very focused on challenging that order that they saw as the masculine symbolic order, and the idea that groups such as women who may be and represent their self in the world in very different ways, referred to as the schizoid, for example, because it doesn't quite fit neatly with that masculine way of representing experience and self in the world. It's been known as othered, or on the margins, and not valued as a knowledge in and of itself. And because this is a historical issue, something that gains kind of a relative permanence across time, which makes the masculine order much more difficult to challenge and much more difficult to deconstruct. But it's one that's kind of seen children and women written out of history. And as parapsychology itself, in a way, is an othered science, as it's not quite in the mainstream. Parapsychology itself has to find a way to be valued, to be legitimated. So it often appeals to the hard sciences, it appeals to the masculine order. Again, maybe that's where the issues of inequality for women researchers, and especially for children, come into play. So the idea of semiosis comes from the French feminist philosopher group, from Julia Kristeva, who coined the term semiotics, much like l'écriture, coined by Helen Sissou, which means women's scripture. Semiosis is a way of representing who we are, experience, being in the world, through a system of symbol and metaphor. So it's very different again from the linguistic, from the mathematical, from all those things that we use in traditional scientific and research practice, but it is there, and it's an important mode of representation, especially for involving groups in research that are often on the margins, like children. And these are some examples on this page from children's contributions to parapsychological studies that I've conducted with them. The spiral at the bottom was produced by a child aged 5 who often had experiences of moving through portals and having experiences of what she referred to as other places, but on description seemed to be like other dimensions, for example. The eye that you can see on this slide was produced by a 14-year-old girl who again often experienced reality as extremely layered and extremely dreamlike, and had a raft of other experiences too. But these are experiences that do transcend themselves, the rational and the ordered and the masculine, and do require a different kind of semiotic to be able to bring it into the world as a form of data. And not soft data, important data, data that can access realms and dimensions of experience that the rational and the mathematical and the discursive can't always reach. And the reason I put Louisa Rhine onto this slide is, of course, she herself was a woman in parapsychology who also challenged it in a sense by collecting lots of letters that had been written in by children and looking at their subjective experiences. And again, because the idea of the masculine and the feminine brings in the idea of the subjective and the objective always seen as the masculine and the detached. So what this means is there is an issue then in science in terms of allowing for, facilitating and bringing in different forms of knowledge, different ways in how we represent knowledge, and different ways for doing research that involves rethinking methodologies and certainly rethinking paradigms, because children really can reveal another dimension of parapsychology that we can enable if we start to think more and value what we refer to as soft data in very different ways. You know, really breaking and challenging that dichotomy between feminine and masculine, hard data, soft data. And children really invite us to do that. They leave us with no choice, because we are left with a messy and chaotic kind of data that we do have to approach and come to in a different way. What's interesting at the moment in the sciences and in philosophy, there's a sense that there is a shift, not just in paradigms, but maybe within male scientists themselves, what other writers refer to as the green man, sky father ethos, which is where male researchers are really thinking about other kinds of data, realizing, coming to a point with certain ways for doing studies and doing research, and realizing that they do need other ways. They do need to look more deeply into subjective experience. They do need to involve people more in order to try and create and build a bigger picture of what it means to be human, of what is subjective experience, what is consciousness, what our paranormal experience is. It requires everything and everyone in these ventures into exploring what it means to be human. And there is a sense that even male scientists are coming to these conclusions now and adopting and embodying what we would refer to more as the feminine as well as the masculine. There's a move towards the ethics of the maternal. So the ethics of the maternal is about enabling and creating spaces for others to be involved in research. It's about the bringing the dark mother in, the challenging mother, the one who will break down and deconstruct, and and know what needs to be in there. The intuitive researcher that will use all kinds of resources to really get a better picture of what's going on, of what it means to be human and what is human experience. And parapsychology is a really good way for us to challenge conventional notions of human experience and open the doorway for us to explore again that the vast spectrum of human experience that we don't explore, especially in disciplines such as social science. Again, really important to social science and social research is a way for shifting hearts and minds, and it's certainly a way for developing policy that can affect the lives of people too. So all important considerations. We need to rethink epistemology, and we need to rethink how we value knowledge, because it's othered doesn't mean it's not valuable. Othered becomes very valuable. It becomes something that we've not considered before, something that can shed light on these vast mysteries that we still have, regardless of the masculine methodologies that we've been using for a very long time now. So it offers a potential, and it's a potential that we really need to start to look at alongside, not to dismiss the masculine or the rational or the ordered. It's all equally important. And to also rethink methodologies. A methodology that I use with children to enable children to participate well in research is a participatory research. And that's about co-creating research studies with the people that you are researching with. It's about affording them an active agency in the research rather than a passive subjectivity or objectivity, depending on the kind of research. And it's certainly a way to enable these different knowledges to come up and come through. So in terms of where we go from here, considering the issues that an examination of women's position in parapsychology research and missing children in parapsychology research, there needs to be a move to include children more in parapsychology research. And it is difficult to do. If we think about the processes around research, for example, ethics, that's a tricky thing to look at ethics when we're researching with children. So it takes an expertise and a knowledge around how to involve children in research, but it's something that's achievable and can be done, and is certainly worth the process and the effort for what children can bring to this work and to these explorations too. It requires a critical praxis, which is about starting from the living experiences of people, not just children, but adults too, and matching that to theory instead of it being kind of a top-down theoretical or experimental researcher assumption. Sometimes it's nice to start from the bottom up and keep reconciling the theory with the living experiences of people. It requires a move into real world contexts and outside the scientific lab. The world could be a laboratory in and of itself, but something interesting happens, for example, when you carry out research with children in settings that they're really comfortable with. If you think about that in comparison with doing experiments with children in school contexts, I mean, that there are differences. Studies from the past show that children perform better, for example, in ESP studies when they're conducted in their homes, their home environments, rather than school environments. So something about bringing parapsychology research with children into real world contexts is really worth noting. Seeing children as core researchers rather than small children who don't really know anything, which is our, again, mainstream view of children and children in research, but opening up opportunities to train children to do research, to help design experiments. I've done a lot of this, and can promise that it's really valuable, and children will really surprise you in terms of their knowledge, but in the sense of helping an adult researcher to bring other children into your research studies. And also thinking about the masculine definitions that we have in science, such as validity, and knowing that there can be different kinds of something that we refer to as validity. For example, something called transactional validity is where, as an adult researcher, you've made conclusions about data that's been produced back through child participants, and going back to child participants with that data, and again, enabling opportunities for children to co-analyze and co-interpret data that's produced through these studies. And that's the way of getting that transactional validity around your interpretations you've brought as an adult, or as a researcher, or as a scientist, whatever your role is in that research. So I just want to finish this presentation with a child and with a child's perspective. And this is a child who was involved in one of the studies that I've conducted. And this is from Rosie, age 8 years. And she says, adults have more experience, so adults think children only have imaginative than experience. They should try and feel that vibe and feel the children talking. They should try and dig into it. Apart from the urge to change that word imaginative to imagination, because that's what we do as adults, I don't think I can add anything else to Rosie's statement. Thanks for listening.